Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we begin a journey into one of the most fascinating and powerful stories ever written, the story of the Book of Daniel. This is not just another tale from history. This is a story of courage, faith, and mysteries that reach across centuries. Some call the Book of Daniel the key to unlocking the Bible, because hidden inside its pages are dreams, visions, and prophecies that connect the past, present, and future. But before we dive into the symbols and secrets, let me take you back to where it all began. To a world of kingdoms and empires where a young man's faith would be tested in ways most of us can hardly imagine. Picture this. The mighty Babylonian army sweeps across the land, leaving nothing but ruin in its path. Jerusalem falls, its treasures are taken, and with them, the brightest young minds are carried off into exile. Among them is Daniel, a teenager torn from his home and thrown into a strange world where his beliefs, his courage, and even his very identity would be challenged. For many, this would be the end of hope. But for Daniel, it was just the beginning of a story that would inspire millions for generations to come. The Book of Daniel is not just about one man. It is about kings who believed themselves to be gods, about fiery furnaces that should have destroyed the faithful, about lions who should have devoured the innocent, and about visions of beasts and kingdoms that tell the story of the world's rise and fall. It is a book that dares to say, history is not random. There is a plan, a purpose, and a God who reigns even when empires crumble. What makes this story so gripping is not only the miracles, but the humanity behind them. Daniel was not a superhero. He was an ordinary young man who faced extraordinary choices. Would he bow down to the pressures of a foreign king? Would he compromise his faith just to survive? Or would he trust in the God of Israel, even if it meant standing alone? These are questions that still echo in our world today, where faith is often tested in subtle, yet powerful ways. As we journey together through this story, we will discover why many call the Book of Daniel the backbone of biblical prophecy, and why its visions are seen as the key to unlocking the Bible's greatest mysteries. The fiery furnace, the handwriting on the wall, the lion's den, and the dreams of empires rising and falling. Each moment is filled with suspense, and each vision stretches our imagination beyond the limits of history into eternity. But before we uncover the meaning of Daniel's dreams or the secrets of the four beasts, we must begin at the heart of the story. A young man standing in a foreign palace, facing the greatest challenge of his life. What choice would you make if everything familiar was stripped away, and your faith was the only thing you had left? Stay with me, because the story of Daniel is about to begin, and the stakes are higher than you can imagine. This is more than history, more than prophecy. It's a story that still speaks to us today. And as we move deeper, you'll soon see why the Book of Daniel truly is the key to unlocking the Bible. But Daniel's first test in Babylon will not be his last, and as he takes his stand, the shadow of even greater trials begins to rise on the horizon. The question is, how far will his faith carry him, and what mysteries will be revealed when the dreams of kings start to unfold? Daniel's story begins in a time of great upheaval. The people of Jerusalem had long believed that their city would stand forever, that the temple was unshakable, and that their God would never allow foreign armies to tear it down. But the Babylonian Empire was rising with unstoppable force, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, a ruler whose power seemed limitless. He swept through nations like a storm, and soon Jerusalem fell under his hand. The city's walls were broken, its treasures carried away, and its brightest young men taken as captives to serve in the royal courts of Babylon. Among those chosen was Daniel, along with his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Imagine what that must have felt like for Daniel. He was young, far from home, with his future completely uncertain. Everything familiar, his language, his customs, his way of life, was stripped away. The Babylonians even tried to give him a new name, Belteshazzar, hoping to erase his identity and reshape him into one of their own. But inside, Daniel knew who he was. He belonged to the God of Israel, and no matter what pressures surrounded him, that truth could not be taken. This quiet determination would soon be tested in ways far greater than he could have imagined. In Babylon, the king ordered that these young men be trained for service in the palace. They were offered the best food, the richest wine, and the finest education. To most, this might seem like a reward, a chance at comfort after the hardship of war. But for Daniel, it was a dangerous test. The king's food was more than a meal. It was a symbol of loyalty, an invitation to join in the worship of Babylon's gods. To eat at the king's table was to compromise the faith that Daniel held so dear. This small detail, a simple plate of food, became the first great decision of his life in exile. Would he give in to survive, or would he find the courage to stand apart, even at great risk? This moment is powerful, because it shows us how the story of Daniel is not only about grand visions of the future, but also about small, personal choices that shape destiny. The book of Daniel is filled with prophecy and mystery, but at its heart, it is the story of human faith in the face of impossible odds. Every chapter reveals the clash between kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of God, between the pride of kings and the humility of those who choose to trust in something greater. Yet this is just the beginning. Daniel's refusal to compromise would spark a chain of events that drew him deeper into the heart of Babylon's politics, and placed him directly in front of kings who dreamed of empires lasting forever. The question is, how long could one young man stand firm against the might of the world's greatest power? And what visions would he be given that revealed the rise and fall of kingdoms yet to come? Daniel's choice to refuse the king's food may seem small on the surface, but in reality, it was a quiet rebellion against the most powerful empire in the world. In that moment, Daniel drew a line. He would serve in Babylon, he would learn their language and wisdom, but he would not let go of his God. This act of faith created a hidden conflict, one young exile standing against the pressure of an entire kingdom. It was not a loud protest, but a steady conviction that set him apart. His friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, stood with him, forming a bond that would be tested again and again. Together they requested only vegetables and water, a simple diet that symbolized their loyalty to the God of Israel. To many, this might have seemed foolish. Who would risk offending the king over food? But in Babylon, everything carried meaning, and Daniel's decision challenged the system that demanded complete allegiance to the empire and its gods. At the same time, a larger subplot began to unfold in the palace. King Nebuchadnezzar was a man of towering pride and ambition, ruling an empire that stretched farther than any before him. But even kings are not without fear. At night, his mind was troubled by dreams, strange, unsettling visions that robbed him of peace. He demanded answers, and when his wisest counselors failed him, the tension in the court grew sharp. This would be the first time Daniel's faith and wisdom brought him face to face with a king who thought himself untouchable. The clash between Babylon's power and Daniel's faith was no longer just personal. It was becoming a stage where the fate of empires and the mystery of prophecy would collide. The question was no longer if Daniel could survive Babylon, but how far the God he served would carry him in a world built on pride and fear. Nebuchadnezzar's dreams grew darker, and with them his anger more dangerous. He demanded that his magicians and wise men not only interpret the dream, but first tell him what he had dreamed. It was an impossible command, and when they failed, he ordered that every wise man in Babylon be executed. Daniel and his friends suddenly found themselves under the shadow of death, caught in a crisis that none of them had caused. The tension was unbearable. One wrong move, and their lives would be taken. It was here that Daniel's faith reached its breaking point. Surrounded by fear, he asked for time from the king, a bold request that could have cost him everything. That night, he and his friends prayed with desperation, seeking mercy from the God of heaven. In the silence of the night, as Babylon slept restlessly, the question hung heavy in the air. Would the God of Israel answer, or would Daniel's story end before it even began? The next day loomed like a storm. Soldiers stood ready to carry out the king's orders. The palace halls whispered with dread, every court official waiting to see who would survive Nebuchadnezzar's rage. In the midst of it all, Daniel prepared himself to walk before the throne of the most powerful man on earth. Every step carried risk. Every word would be measured. The dream was no ordinary vision. It held the fate of empires, a prophecy that would stretch far beyond Babylon itself. The suspense hung like a sword over Daniel's head. The king demanded answers, and the room was charged with fear. The moment of truth had come, and the weight of kingdoms rested on what Daniel would say next. As Daniel prepared to speak before King Nebuchadnezzar, the tension in the royal court was already unbearable. Yet just when it seemed the drama could not grow any sharper, a new twist emerged. The dream Daniel was about to reveal was not only troubling to the king, but also dangerous for Daniel himself. For the vision contained a message that no ruler, especially one as proud as Nebuchadnezzar, would want to hear. It spoke of kingdoms rising and falling, of an empire that thought it would last forever, being replaced by others. To tell such a truth to a king who believed his reign was eternal could cost Daniel his life before he ever finished speaking. This moment revealed the deeper conflict inside the palace walls. Babylon was not merely a kingdom of gold and glory. It was a kingdom built on fear, pride, and the belief that human power could never be shaken. For Daniel, the dream was not only about prophecy, it was about confronting the arrogance of men who thought themselves greater than God. His words would cut to the very heart of Nebuchadnezzar's pride, and the wrong word could bring an instant order of execution. At the same time, forces within the court were shifting. Not everyone wanted Daniel to succeed. Some advisors, jealous of his wisdom and threatened by his favor with the king, whispered against him. These men had already failed to reveal the dream, and they feared that Daniel's success would expose their weakness. Beneath the surface, another plot was forming, one that would place Daniel and his friends in even greater danger as their loyalty to God clashed with the envy and schemes of Babylon's elite. The stage was set for more than just the interpretation of a dream. This was a battle between truth and deception, humility and pride, faith and fear. The king leaned forward on his throne, his eyes blazing with curiosity and suspicion, while Daniel stood with the weight of prophecy pressing upon him. If he spoke with courage, he could change the course of history. If he faltered, he might not live to take another breath. And even as the silence stretched before Daniel's answer, a larger shadow began to rise. A coming test that would not only shake Nebuchadnezzar, but also drag Daniel's friends into the heart of fire itself. The story was far from over, and the danger was only beginning to unfold. The silence in the throne room broke as Daniel began to speak. He told Nebuchadnezzar that no wise man, no magician, and no power on earth could reveal the king's dream. Only the God of heaven could uncover such mysteries. Then, with steady words, Daniel described exactly what the king had seen in his sleep. A giant statue made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, standing tall and fearsome. But then a stone, not cut by human hands, struck the statue and shattered it into pieces. The wind carried the fragments away until nothing remained, while the stone grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth. Nebuchadnezzar's eyes widened. This was his dream, down to the last detail. Daniel explained its meaning. Each part of the statue represented a kingdom, powerful yet temporary. Babylon, the head of gold, would rise in glory, but it would not last. Other empires would follow, each one crumbling in its turn. At the end, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom that would never be destroyed. A kingdom not built by human hands. The room was charged with awe and fear. The most powerful king in the world was told his empire was only the beginning, that greater powers would come, and that ultimately all human kingdoms would fall before one eternal reign. It was both a revelation and a warning, and everyone waited for the king's reaction. To their astonishment, Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face before Daniel, declaring that Daniel's God was truly the Lord of Kings. Daniel's life was not only spared, he was promoted, given honor and authority in the empire that had once sought to erase him. But just as the tension seemed to release, a darker twist emerged. Nebuchadnezzar, though humbled in that moment, could not let go of his pride. The dream that should have broken him instead planted another seed. If his kingdom was the head of gold, then he would build an image of gold entirely, towering and gleaming, a monument to his own power. This act would lead to a trial by fire for Daniel's closest friends, proving that the conflict between faith and empire was far from over. The dream was revealed, but the story of Daniel had only reached its fiercest turning point. The golden statue Nebuchadnezzar built stood as a challenge to the very prophecy Daniel had revealed. It was as if the king was determined to rewrite destiny with his own hands, to prove that his empire would never fall. When the order went out that everyone in Babylon must bow before this towering image, the test of faith became more dangerous than ever. Daniel's friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, stood firm and refused to worship the idol. Their defiance enraged the king, and they were thrown into the blazing furnace, flames so hot that even the soldiers who cast them in were consumed. Yet, in the heart of the fire, a miracle happened. The three young men stood unharmed, and with them appeared a fourth figure, radiant and untouchable. When they emerged without even the smell of smoke on their clothes, Nebuchadnezzar was left speechless. This moment was the final confirmation that the God Daniel served was greater than the gods of Babylon, greater than kings and empires, greater than fire and death. It tied back to the dream, to the truth that all human power is fragile, while the kingdom of heaven endures forever. Daniel's story, filled with visions of beasts, kings, and prophecies of ages to come, was not just about distant history. It was about the constant struggle between pride and humility, fear and faith, kingdoms of men and the kingdom of God. As Daniel grew older, he continued to serve under new kings and new empires, yet his faith never wavered. His visions pointed far beyond his own lifetime, stretching into the future, reminding us that God's plan was unfolding even when the world seemed ruled by chaos. The lion's den, the dreams of future kingdoms, the handwriting on the wall, all of these moments carried the same message. Earthly powers rise and fall, but God's kingdom is unshakable. So as we close this story, the lesson of the book of Daniel remains clear. It is a story of courage in exile, of faith under fire, of trust in the unseen when everything around seemed lost. It is a story that still speaks today, offering hope to anyone who feels surrounded by pressure, reminding us that standing firm in faith can change everything. The kingdoms of this world may boast of their strength, but like the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, they all crumble in time. Only one kingdom endures, the one not built by human hands, the eternal kingdom of God. And that is the key to unlocking the Bible and the story that will never end.